Hello, and thank you for joining us for the Pharmacy Cannabis Lecture Series. My name is Candace Hawes, and I want to thank all of our viewers for joining us, and also our customers from the Pharmacy Santa Ana, Santa Barbara, Berkeley, and the Pottery in LA. Today, we're going to be talking about a very important topic and one that is near and dear to the pharmacy family. With the rise of legalization and the decrease of stigma against cannabis consumers, many still forget that there are people serving prison sentences for cannabis possession, for acting as a caregiver, for running a cannabis business before their time, and sometimes for conspiracy when they refuse to turn state evidence against others. Many of these individuals are subject to unfair sentencing guidelines and serving decades in prison. At Pharmacy and Glasshouse, we believe it's important to use our platforms to bring light to these issues and work towards reform and the release of every prisoner incarcerated for cannabis. Our guest speaker today is Weldon Angelos. Weldon Angelos was a rising star whose world was turned upside down when he was targeted by a confidential informant and local drug task force in a sting operation. At the age of 23, Angelos was an upcoming music producer and recording artist who had worked closely with luminaries like Snoop Dogg and Tupac Shakur's recording group. But he was also selling cannabis on the side to help pay bills until his music ventures stabilized, which, coupled with his connection to the so-called gangster rap music industry, made him the perfect target for local authorities in his hometown of Salt Lake City, Utah, and ultimately put him in the federal government's crosshairs. We'll have Weldon tell us a little bit more about his story, the sentencing, and circumstances that led to his release. Now that Weldon is free, he's working to reclaim his life, but remains dedicated to the fight to end cannabis prohibition, the war on drugs, and mass incarceration. Thousands of people are still lingering in federal and state prisons across the country, serving cannabis-related sentences. Many of them are minorities, while mostly older white men around the country are profiting from the medical and recreational cannabis industries. Since his release, Angelos has become a leading criminal justice reform advocate and was a key factor in the passage of the First Step Act. He was instrumental in the release of the former Bad Boy Records rapper Loon and the co-founder of Death Row Records, Michael O. Harris. He also played a key role in President Trump's final clemency grants of nearly a dozen individuals who were serving life sentences for cannabis. Angelos is now working with the Biden administration to create a clemency program for cannabis offenders. Weldon Angelos is the founder of the Weldon Project, a nonprofit organization dedicated to funding social change and financial aid for those who are still serving prison time for cannabis-related offenses. Through extensive partnerships through legal cannabis industry, the Weldon Project launched Mission Green, which is an initiative to raise the bar for awareness, social justice, and social equity by providing unique ways for cannabis businesses and consumers to participate in a nationwide campaign aimed to provide relief to those who have been negatively impacted by prohibition. I'm honored to have Weldon with us today and to talk about the work that he's been doing to free those incarcerated cannabis offenders. Hello, Weldon. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I've read so much about you and I've followed your career, so I'm really excited to have you on. I work also with Orange County Normal, and we also support the release of cannabis offenders and want to get them back with their families. And it just makes no sense to have these folks still in jail, especially, with all the advances that we've made. And now that people are making so much money, like you said, it's really time to have these individuals released. I'd like to start with your story. Can you start with the beginning and how you became incarcerated and involved in this movement?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a young teenager, I wanted to make a career in the hip hop industry. And so I relocated to Los Angeles and started producing music for individuals at Death Row Records like Snoop Dogg and Tupac Shakur's recording group. And back in my hometown of Salt Lake City, the federal government was trying to build a case against me, believing I was somehow providing guns and drugs to rap artists. They set up three sting operations to purchase $300 worth of cannabis on three occasions. After I discontinued my communication with the informant, I was indicted and charged with 20 counts, totaling 105 years of mandatory minimums for $900 worth of cannabis as a first-time offense. Because I chose not to cooperate, the federal government forced me to trial, and I was convicted on most counts and sentenced to a mandatory 55-year sentence.
That's crazy. That it just makes no sense at all when there's, we see people that are hurting others, sometimes taking other people's lives and they might get like 7 years or like 10 years. That just is just incredible that we still have the court sentencing people to those long, lengthy sentences that make no sense and have no relation to the actual harm that they had, done to individuals.
Yeah, well, my
Well,
judge noted before he sentenced me that he previously sentenced a murderer to a maximum term of 17 years, and my minimum was 55. He also sentenced a child rapist to a mandatory or maximum of 11 years. And so it just kind of shows you how ridiculous our criminal justice system is, that punishes cannabis use far more harshly than it punishes murderers and child rapists.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, minimum sentencing guidelines just have to go. And, we should look at these guidelines and how they don't make any sense in relation to the crime and the severity of the crime compared to others. So that's something that your group is working on, right?
Absolutely. And just a couple years ago, in the fall of 2018, we worked with the president and members of Congress to pass the First Step Act, which was the first comprehensive federal criminal justice reform since 1970. And it also reformed the statute that allowed prosecutors to seek and secure a 55-year sentence for 3 low-level cannabis charges. And so we were able to change that law. So there's no one going to jail for 55 years today for that type of conduct, but there are many more harsh mandatory minimums still on the book. So there's a lot more work to do.
Yeah, there's a lot more work to do, but that's nice to know that at least that you guys have worked to like solve one little piece of the problem, little by little, chipping away. And then finally, one day we'll finally change the laws and we won't have any more cannabis offenders in jail. I mean, it's just not a good use of resources. And we're really harming our community by taking these people out of their families. So it just makes no sense at all. So, I mean, I can imagine that you were just like in shock, right? When you were sentenced to this extensive period of time and having to go to prison and be away from your family.
Oh, yeah, I was definitely shocked. I was numb. And I knew all along that the sentence I was facing, was 55 years, possibly even 100. I just couldn't accept it in America where, like I said, you see murders getting even as low as 7 years. So I just couldn't believe that the system would allow it to happen, but it did. And so when it did, I went into shock. I mean, it's even more ridiculous when the judge who's presiding over the trial and over the sentencing thinks the sentence is also ridiculous, but can't do anything about it. And so that's really what was shocking to me, to learn that my judge, who was concerned about the sentence, was handcuffed.
That's great. I think I read in your bio as well that after that, the judge actually retired and then he actually helped to change the law and to get you freed. Is that correct?
Yeah, the judge, he actually, as he was sentencing me, he called on the president who appointed him, which was George W. Bush at the time. He called on George W. Bush to intervene and commute my sentence. And then a few years later, after I lost all my appeals and the president didn't intervene, he quit and walked away from a lifetime appointment to the federal bench and became my number one advocate.
Oh, wow. So is he one of the individuals that actually helped you to be released? Like, how did that actually happen? What group worked with you or which attorneys? How
Well,
were you
there were
finding?
many groups. My judge was just one factor, but he was probably the most important factor because, whether it's a president or another judge or the pardon attorney, whoever, when a judge calls for a commutation or a reduction in sentence, they listen, especially my judge, who was a very tough on crime judge. He was a member of the Federalist Society. He was a proponent of the death penalty. He was an opponent of the exclusionary rule. He tried to overturn Miranda rights. So this was no soft on crime judge, but he had only been on the bench a couple of years, and he's seen this crazy sentence for such low-level conduct that it caused him to look at the system in a different light, and he didn't want to be a part of the system that forced judges to do that. So he felt he could be more effective as an advocate, where he could speak his mind freely, and so he resigned and became my number one supporter.
Oh, well, thank God for that. Thank God for those in the law enforcement community that actually dedicate their lives then to righting the wrongs that they had been a part of, and that he was part of your release. So I know, and we talked about that just briefly, but when you had to go to prison and you had to leave your family for that period of time, did you already have children at that point, and did you have to leave them behind, and how did it affect your family?
Yeah, I had two sons, 5 and 7, and their lives were destroyed. I was the breadwinner. Even though I was in the music industry, I was also selling cannabis on the side, until my music venture stabilized. And they did. They stabilized. I got a major record deal. And for the first time in my life, because I grew up in poverty, I had money. And so I was able to give my sons a good lifestyle. But it was short lived because it was all taken from me after the federal government decided to indict me and take me away for the rest of my life. And so my sons had to end up living a childhood like I did on welfare. So it was just completely heartbreaking to see my kids struggle. My father, passed away from all the stress that he had to do, trying to get me out, and just witnessing, what they did to me, because my father had been to prison as well. And so it was just a nightmare for everybody in my family.
Wow. I have two kids about that same age, and I cannot imagine like having to leave them, the heartbreak. And I think that is probably the worst punishment of all, right? Like having to leave your kids and abandon your family. And then on top of it, for just such a senseless reason. I can't believe it. And so I imagine, when you finally release, like the first thing a lot of prisoners or firmly incarcerated want to do is probably just turn around and never look back. They're back with their families. They just want to regain their life and their sense of normalcy. And so, I really applaud you for, staying dedicated to making sure that you're correcting the wrongs of society and helping other prisoners. So yeah, just thank you so much. So
Yeah.
how many years of your sentence did you actually serve?
So I served 13 years of the 55-year sentence. And, I'm only free today because of my judge and the many advocates, even my sister, who fought for me for the entire time. I had people from all over the political spectrum. I had Republican senators like Mike Lee and Rand Paul, Orrin Hatch. I had Democrats like Cory Booker and Patrick Leahy. I had celebrities like Alicia Keys, Bonnie Raitt, and Snoop Dogg fighting for me. And I had an amazing group of attorneys and law professors and former government officials from the Department of Justice. I had Janet Reno, who was Bill Clinton's attorney general, former FBI directors, and just 165 former government officials that also were fighting side by side with other advocates. And one thing that's unique is that not a lot of people in prison get that kind of support.
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone has famous friends or rappers or senators pulling for them, or even a judge. And so when I got out, I realized that I had amassed this amazing network and group of advocates, that I had to use it to help the people I left behind. There's an individual incarcerated still to this day named Luke Scarmazzo, who is serving 22 years for operating a medical dispensary in Modesto, California. He just simply followed state law. He was an entrepreneur, and he got indicted by the Bush administration, and he's still in prison. We were able to get his co-defendant, Ricardo Montes, out at the last month of President Obama's administration, but Luke is still in prison. So stories like that, because I met people who had ridiculous sentences like mine or even worse. So I knew I couldn't just get out and go on with my life and, go back into music. I had to take advantage of the network that I was able to build from prison to help others.
Yeah, I'm actually familiar with Luke Scarmazzo's case, and we've been a pen pal with him at one of the nonprofits that I work with. So thank you for, working to advocate for him. I think that his case is very similar to yours. He was a young guy who was involved in the hip hop culture, making a lot of money. And, he was targeted for those reasons. There was many people doing the same things that he was doing, but, either you're a minority or you're a certain, cultural group that they don't like, or you're, a celebrity or make a lot of money or whatever. And you become, the poster child. And they use that to scare other people. And it's just so sad. And I really hope that Luke gets out soon. Is there any advancement with his case?
Yes, we have petitioned the president for a commutation, but we've also filed a compassionate release motion in court, and we could get a decision any day. I started working on Luke's case in 2013, right after Obama announced a clemency program. And so I went up to Luke and said, look, you're a perfect candidate. Your case is more compelling than mine. I was in the streets, and, there was a lot of gang allegations. In my case, he was simply following state law. And so I felt like it would be an easier case. So I helped him draft a petition for him as co-defendant. And then I got out with, 8 months left in Obama's administration. And I went and we brought the cases to the Obama administration, and Ricardo's was granted. Luke's was denied the same day with no justification or no reason. We later found out that his prosecutor has been opposing his release, and that's why he didn't get out like Ricardo.
Oh, man. Well, we all just need to keep fighting, signing those petitions. And I think at the end, we'll ask you what everybody can do to help support. But thank you for working on that. And then we pray every day that we'll see the message on social media that Luke got released, or some of the other cannabis prisoners that you've been working with, that they've been released as well. So tell me, when you started Weldon Project Mission Green, what are some of the organizations and some like the cannabis businesses that have supported you?
So after we passed the First Step Act in 2018, and reformed some of these mandatory minimums, it didn't do anything to individuals who are incarcerated federally for cannabis only offenses unless you had a certain enhancement. And so I felt like these individuals have also been passed over during various presidential administrations. Their clemency programs focus on other drugs. And so I felt this is the most deserving group of offender, and they should be prioritized. So I launched the Weldon Project and Project Mission Green in 2018 to sort of fill that void. There was no group that was dedicated only to cannabis cases for clemency that also had connections to the White House, connections to members of Congress. And so we launched this with that in mind, cases like Luke's and Cory Cooper's and others. And we had initial support from companies like Weed Maps, Cresco, the Coke Network, but we actually originally we were self-funded for the first 18 months because we couldn't find support. But eventually we did, and once we started receiving support from the industry, we started seeing a lot of results. We were able to get dozens of people out during the Trump administration's clemency program. We were able to see thousands of people come home because of the First Step Act and a provision that it changed called compassionate release. We were able to set a precedent for people who are in there for cannabis federally. And so there have been a number of companies that have supported us since then, including Glass House, Scott's Miracle Grow, Verano, and the list goes on. But we definitely need more support.
Yeah. What I have enjoyed seeing, though, in the last couple of years is the uptick in cannabis companies actually wanting to support, groups like yours, Last Prisoner Project, putting money back into righting some of the wrongs that have been caused with prohibition. So that's great to see that that you've gotten a lot of support from the cannabis industry, because that's what's going to take everybody, hands on deck, reminding people in their networks that this is going on, using their resources, and dedicating them to groups like yours that have lawyers and staff that can help, write the pardons and the petitions. So that's great. I'm glad to see that you continue to receive, that you're getting support. I hope that you continue to get it as well. So Mission Green is one of the initiatives of Weldon Project, right?
Correct.
And the specific mission of Mission Green is to work more closely, with the release of the incarcerated cannabis offenders, right?
Yes. Mission Green is focused just on cannabis justice, and which we started specifically on the federal level because federal sentences tend to be, way more draconian than state level punishment. And so, but now we work on the state level as well because we've been connecting with various governors that are interested in cannabis clemency policy. And so we've also worked with the White House on changing their cannabis clemency policy. And so we're trying to knock out the federal system first and then sort of shift our attention to the states.
Well, that's the best place to start. If you can really, move legislation and policy at the federal level, it's going to be much easier, when you come to the states, instead of working from the bottom up. So that's a really good plan. You have other services that you guys provide through the Weldon Project as well, like the Hands Up program, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the Hand Up program is a commissary program that was started by a brand called Reform. And the Hand Up program essentially provides financial support to anyone incarcerated federally for a cannabis offense. And this program is so important because I was incarcerated, and outside of my brief time in the music industry, I didn't have money. And so when I got to prison, I didn't have any money. The feds took everything, legal money and all. And I ran out of money, and they pay you 12 cents an hour. And so if you want to speak to your family, you got to pay. It's like $5 a phone call. It's 5 cents a minute for your email. And there's food. Prison feeds you enough just to keep you alive, not full. And so if you want to have extra food so you don't go to bed hungry, you got to have money in your account. And so we want to make sure that while we're fighting for these individuals' freedom, that they're as comfortable as possible, since they shouldn't be there in the first place. And so the Hand Up program, Cookies has supported us.
Yeah.
Glass House, Verano, all these other companies have helped, because this is so important, especially for women who are incarcerated, because they face unique challenges that men don't face while incarcerated. And so it's really important to support as many women who are incarcerated as possible.
That's really, really important. I think that that's really important that you guys are doing that, and thank you. Something that our nonprofit does, that I work with, Normal, is we used to send, like I said, cards every month to the prisoners. But people forget too that when you're in prison, you don't really have, stimulation from the outside world. A lot of prisoners don't get letters, they don't get communication, and so they could go, months and sometimes years feeling like they've been forgotten, especially in the cannabis world, when they see, so much progress being made, and all these people just enjoying the freedom of cannabis. They might feel like, hey, we're sitting in here suffering and nobody's really thinking about us and following our cases. So we used to write these cards, and we used to get feedback when people would get released, like Aaron Sandusky or Randy Lanier, and they would tell us like how important it was, to have that support every month, to have those cards, and how they'd pour over them time and time again. And same thing with commissary, like if you donate $20 towards commissary, that means a world to the person incarcerated, and the things that you can actually help them, get, like food to keep them healthy, and like communication with their family. That's just a great benefit. So people can, individual people can also donate to the Hands Up program as well, right?
Absolutely. They can go directly to one of our websites, the WELDONProject.org or projectmissiongreen.org, and donate directly, or they can send them directly to the person incarcerated, and they can reach out to us for the information.
Great. Do you guys keep a list of incarcerated people that you guys need support for, maybe in like letters and stuff?
Yes, we do keep a list, and the list is growing every day. We're actually working on expanding our clemency program so we can file more clemency petitions, because we don't have a huge staff. And so we recently partnered with universities like Ohio State, ASU, Tulsa, to create a larger program so we can file a few hundred clemency petitions a year.
That's great. So then for attorneys that might be listening or watching, that you guys accept like pro bono work as well?
Yes. So we need as many attorneys as possible, because not many attorneys are versed in clemency policy, but having an attorney to get all the paperwork, to kind of put everything together, is really important. It takes longer for us to do it because I'm not a lawyer, and most of the time I'm the one drafting these petitions. So it's really important to have lawyers assisting us.
Yeah, well, I'll definitely tell a couple people I know that have been like looking for ways to get involved. This is a very worthy cause. Who are some of the prisoners that you guys are working with currently? We talked about Luke Scarmazzo. He's definitely one that, is advertised like in the social media kind of cannabis world. But what are some other prisoners that we could mention?
So some of the other incarcerated persons we're working with include Parker Coleman, include Danny Rodriguez, Edwin Rubis. There's a ton of people that are in there that are not only trying to get out, but they're also trying to be a part of the solution. They want to work with us to help as much as possible. And so this is a passionate group, and we're just really excited to have the opportunity to be able to help these individuals.
Do you think that citizen petitions are helpful in getting people released, or is it more like legal petitions that you guys submit to the courts that you think hold more weight there?
Yeah, so really, when I say the word petition, it's not actually a petition in that sense. It's more of a memo.
Legal document.
Yeah, it's like a document that basically articulates reasons why this individual is deserving of mercy from the president, or via a motion to the court. And so petitions from individuals like change.org, people can sign that. Those can be effective to show public support. But I don't know how effective they are because, anyone can do them. And I've seen people with a million signatures and still not get out. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't try. I feel like the better place for those petitions is to individual members of Congress, because the more pressure you put on a member of Congress, you could get them to do something, versus the president, who typically doesn't read them, and you never know what goes on behind the scenes of a clemency petition. We don't get to know, what their reasons are for denying someone or granting. So I think it's more effective to direct those petitions to members of Congress or to the president on, doing clemency, period, rather than on an individual basis.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. Are there any specific representatives that people should reach out to, or is it really just different depending on like the case that you're kind of wanting to advocate for?
No, I think Republicans. Right now, we need more Republicans in order to end prohibition on the federal level. So if there's any Republicans in states where there's medical cannabis on the books or recreational, those are the members that we want to target because they're more likely going to vote in favor of it because of their constituents. And so I think those Republicans are the ones we need to put pressure on. People like Senator Mike Lee, who represents a state with medical cannabis on the books. He has to support states' rights, and ending federal prohibition, would give the state the ability to actually fully participate because right now, even if your state's legal, you're still violating federal law. You don't have access to the banking system. Businesses are suffering because of 280E. And the only way to fix that is to end the federal ban, which would then leave it up to the states to decide how they want to implement their marijuana laws.
Yeah. That's a good point. It all stems from, the highest level of the government. So that's awesome. How many prisoners do you think that you guys have worked with throughout the years, or formerly incarcerated?
So can you rephrase the question?
Sorry. Since you guys formed in 2018, how many formerly incarcerated have you worked with to help secure their release or working on like their cases currently?
Oh, probably hundreds. A lot of cases come to us, and either we'll work on them or we'll pass them to another organization that has, resources. But we also help individuals when they get out. We help them find jobs. We help direct them to, companies that are willing to hire them or whatever. So there's probably hundreds of people that we've helped. We've also helped probably 30 something people obtain clemency, and probably 46 people get released in the court system.
Wow, that's huge. Those are lives that you're really saving. That's what I say, that there's many ways that cannabis, saves lives, as a medicine, and also like the community and like that, something that we could do. It's not only important to provide cannabis to people to help with their medical condition, but as an advocate, it's also important to advocate for the release of people that are in jail, because really you're saving those people's lives. It's also it's almost more impactful than helping someone find relief and like get cancer treatment or epilepsy treatment. It's very fulfilling to help get these people back their freedom. So that's amazing. I think
legislation is so much more impactful because we can work on individual cases, and it takes a lot of work. Just doing one petition could take a few months of my time working on it. If we pass a law like the First Step Act that we passed in 2018 has so far released over 20,000 people based on that one law. And so right now we're currently working with Congress to pass something on the federal level. I recently had the pleasure to testify before the Senate at the first ever Senate hearing on legalizing cannabis on the federal level. And we've also written some legislation that would provide expungements for people with certain cannabis convictions on the federal level, which has been introduced, and we think it'll likely pass this December. So there will be progress made there, and we're hoping that next year we'll be able to see some more comprehensive reform at the federal level.
That's awesome. I pray that we do. I really, really hope that, that we get it together and that we release all these folks and that we pass some federal reform that will actually, provide relief to all these guys.
The problem is that, once we deschedule cannabis on the federal level, the states still have to legalize. So there's going to be states like Idaho that maintain prohibition. And so the real work begins once we deschedule on the federal level, because like alcohol, the federal government can't force states to legalize. So the states, we're still going to have to work really hard to not only free people who are still incarcerated on the state level, but to convince those states to change the cannabis policy.
Yeah, that's true. There's still some states that'll be holdouts. I mean, you mentioned alcohol. You still see that with alcohol. There's some states where you still have to buy alcohol in like a state controlled store, so it is going to be, after we do have that relief at a federal level, those, like you said, there's still a lot of work to do. And there's still some states that will try to pass down, really unfair, lengthy sentences. And so we'll still need to advocate on that. This is something that is, even as our legalization and like the access to cannabis expands, like this is something that still moves very slowly, and we still need to stay focused on it and put resources in. How can people support you guys? What is the best way to support? Is it donations to help fund the legal work that you guys are doing?
So that's one way to donate. Go into our website and donate, and also following us on social and sharing our story, sharing our posts, but also getting involved and joining us in the fight. They don't have to, work directly with us, but contact your lawmaker, contact the president, write as many letters as possible, and express support for reforming these unjust laws. Yeah,
that's great. And, I have a couple people that like to do this on a regular basis. They like to, write letters to prisoners and to their representatives. And, it doesn't really take very much time, but the impact is huge. There's a lot of websites where you can get like sample letters, templates. Do you have an organization that you think is like a good one to direct people to like find samples and templates like that?
I think it's better to write one from the heart. I think the sample ones are less impactful. I think it's simple as just writing them, telling them who you are and why they think it's important to do this. It can be one paragraph, but I feel like it's more impactful when the member of Congress sees an original letter from a constituent rather than just a template.
Yeah, that's true. I've heard that as well. Well, this has been really informative, and I really appreciate you, and thank you for all the work that you're doing. Like I said, so many people, they had such a horrible experience and they just want to move on with their lives. So, for you to stay dedicated to this and to, help your brothers and sisters get freed from jail, and not only that, but just to change, policy so that, you make an impact in this world forever, and that, that you made a difference. And, sometimes, and I like to say this, sometimes it's the worst things that ever happened to you that put you on the path of where you're meant to be. You were meant to do this. You were meant to fight for freedom and to help all these individuals. And, very unfortunately, you had to pay this heavy price. But I think that the work that you're doing is just amazing. And I'm really glad that that my company that I work with, Pharmacy and Glass House, that we support you. Here at the dispensaries, people can buy the Weldon Project sweatshirt that we have that says "No one should be in jail for a plant." I know that the proceeds there are going back to your organization, and sometimes we do point of sale fundraisers for you guys. So definitely, anybody watching, please support the Weldon Project. Check out their website. It's got a lot of resources there. Follow them on social, donate money. You guys are a 501c3 nonprofit, right?
Correct.
So all your donations are tax deductible, and they definitely get put to good use. It seems like you're an organization that doesn't have a lot of overhead, that everything just goes directly into the work that you do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of it goes directly to the people incarcerated, but also directly to the work, the clemency work and everything else. But I do want to note that if you're a company wants to donate and you're a plant touching, you cannot deduct the donation. Because of 280E, it restricts businesses. If you try to deduct it, you will get in trouble. So unfortunately, until we pass some kind of reform, 280E is going to be there. We're working on something this year that we hope will pass next year. But for now, a lot of companies don't know that, and they try to write it off, and they always end up getting hit for it. So just wanted to know that.
I didn't actually know that about the donations to cannabis plant touching companies. So thank you for sharing that. We want to keep everybody out of the legal system. We don't want anyone to have to pay, any more money to the government or serve any time. Well, thank you again so much. This has been a great, presentation. I feel like we've educated our consumers on this very important issue that a lot of people don't think about. They think that, everything is just great in cannabis, but people are still being sentenced to prison and jail time for cannabis. It's still happening. It's still happening at a very frequent rate, right?
Absolutely. And just for instance, there was an individual out of Michigan. He got 16 years for following state law. And right now, the federal government could walk in any cannabis company and charge anyone in there they want to, and there's nothing anyone can do about it, except in the medical side, because there is a rider that may not pass every year, but when it is passed, it prevents the DOJ from using funds to prosecute them. But outside of that congressional rider, there's nothing that prevents the federal government from prosecuting anyone in the state legal industries.
Yeah, it's true. And I mean, you really don't want to get caught up with the federal government. People think that fighting a state case, costs tens of thousands of dollars. When you're fighting the federal government, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they don't do time served.
They have an open checkbook. You can't beat them. And it's just that they are the most aggressive agency in the world. I know it. I got charged for 105 years for $900 worth of cannabis. So I know how powerful the federal government is, and it's ridiculous. But I think one last thing that people need to understand is that in the eyes of the federal government, if you are selling cannabis on the streets in the illicit market, you're no different from those following state law and, have a legal dispensary or legal cultivation under federal law. All of it's illegal.
Mm-hmm.
There's no distinction, because I hear a lot of people in the corporate world on the cannabis side where they say, oh, well, they're traffickers or they're street level. They act like they're different, and they're not. Under federal law, a big cannabis company like Cresco or even Glass House is considered a drug cartel under federal law. There's zero distinction in the eyes of the federal government. So it's important for people to understand, especially companies, that those individuals who are incarcerated, yeah, they knowingly violated state and federal law, but they're no different than the legal company. So we need to fight to get them out. I think that's used as a justification for some of the big companies not to help these individuals.
Yeah, that's just insane. But yeah, I totally agree. They have, in the eyes of the federal government, it's all the same. You just don't want to even be on their radar. And that's why it's so important, I think, though, for these companies to support efforts like yours to try to change the law so they don't ever find themselves in that kind of situation. Yeah, we definitely need change. And all it takes, is change of leadership. We get someone really gnarly in there that,
Jeff Sessions was going to go after recreational cannabis companies.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily Trump, called him off, but those were his intentions. And you get someone in there like him or worse, Tom Cotton or someone like that, and everybody's going down. So.
Yep. They don't understand how fine a line it really is there. And how it could be, the tables could be turned and it could be them. You never know. Well, thank you so much again for your time today. I hope that we were able to bring this to light to people that don't really have much information about what is still going on today in the prison system and how some people who are still getting, sentenced to very, very long sentences. How can people reach you, Weldon, if they wanted to find out more, if they wanted to support you guys?
They can find me on social. Either go to, at Weldon Angelos or at Project Mission Green.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again for your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thank you to our audience as well. This has been another episode of the Pharmacy Cannabis Lecture Series. I hope that the information that we provided helps you become better informed cannabis consumers. And again, I urge you guys to get active and to visit Weldon's page and to support initiatives to change legislation and to make sure that we don't have these kinds of sentences being imposed and that we get everybody that's in there unfairly released and back with their families. Thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing you in another episode of the Pharmacy Cannabis Lecture Series.